I'm Olivia Clementine, and this is Love and Liberation. Today our guest is Khandro Kunzang Dechen Chodron. Khandro Kunzang is a long-time Buddhist practitioner and teacher, as well as holder of the Rigzen Sugdrub and Dujum Tersar lineages. She is the executive director for Saraswati Bhawan and oversees the translations and publications of practice texts available on Saraswati Publications. Khandro Kunzang leads retreats and teachings worldwide, as well as at Phurba Tinliling in Iowa. She also heads the Phurba Peace Mandala Project International. Khandro Kunzang has been a guest a few times. You can visit the show notes for the links to listen into these previous conversations. Thank you so much for meeting today. I know we had bookmarked the Mandala principle, so we'll be exploring that today and in connection to the incredible Vajrakilaya Mandala you're building. So should we just jump into that?
Can just jump in. That's great.
Okay,
Thank
wonderful.
you for allowing me to have this opportunity to talk about this.
Ah, such a joy, such a joy. So yeah, maybe we begin then with the basics. So what is the Mandala principle?
That's a great question. What is the Mandala principle? I like that because most people know mandala images. When you say mandala, something will come in mind, an image that, has some kind of spherical shape with points in the center and sort of geometric designs inside, sort of the symmetrical design. So people kind of know that word mandala now. So I think it might even be in the English dictionary at this point, right? So they think of an image as a thing, but it really is a principle. It really is a very profound principle that communicates these deep spiritual ideas. And so, of course, mandala as a principle and a design have existed in a lot of cultures. But in particular, in the Buddhist and the Vajrayana Buddhist culture, they play a prominent role in our spiritual practices and Vajrayana practices. And a lot of people have witnessed or seen the sand mandalas that the Tibetan lamas will create as part of their generating an enlightened being's palace and retinue. There's a whole tradition of making sand mandalas that are created and then dissipated, as part of the generation and the dissolution phase. But what's not so commonly known is that there are actually three-dimensional mandalas, that when we see this image, this round shape with concentric circles and squares in an image, we're actually kind of looking at an aerial view of a building design. It's sort of like the, top-down floor plan of a building design of a three-dimensional structure. They're not so common. You will find three-dimensional mandalas. There are several monasteries in Nepal that have them. They're usually on the top floor of the monastery. You may not know about them. You have to sort of find out and go up and view them. There's some places they're restricted. You can't view them unless you've had Vajrayana empowerment because they are part of that sacred practices. So they're not so common. Mostly in the West, we've seen the pictures, the flat images, paintings, or the sand mandalas. We have not seen the three-dimensional mandalas. And so that's what we're doing is we're creating this three-dimensional mandala. And the purpose of that is because there's the principle in Buddhism of liberation upon seeing, Tongdro, that to simply see this sacred geometrical pattern makes an imprint on the mind because it communicates enlightened mind. Mandalas are actually like a map of the structure of reality. And so they're this organizing principle. The principle is this organizing order out of chaos, taking lots of disparate things and organizing them in such a way through this enlightened order that's implicit in the universe. It's sort of a law of the universe, this ordering principle. We see mandala designs and shapes in nature, in the way that flowers unfold or shells and things like this. It's a kind of ordering principle of the universe. And so when we see an image like this, it communicates something very deep to our mind. And these particular kinds of mandalas that are in Vajrayana, there's something called the palace architecture style that was formed in the 12th and 13th century. And so they literally are the palace or the abode of an enlightened deity, the representation of the absolute enlightened nature of mind as an image of a deity. So there'll be some kind of deity in the center, and then they're manifesting their abode. They're manifesting their retinues, right? So things will unfold from the center in this sort of geometric way, always according to the four directions. So you have this importance of these directions, which all have different qualities. So there's this unfolding and opening, the retinue, and then the palace structure. And then you have outside the mandala, concentric rings that have different meanings. So it's really a sort of principle of unfoldment from a center point, right? So mandalas all have some kind of periphery, ring in a spherical shape, and some kind of center. So the center rim is sort of, a really basic idea of a mandala structure. And then what is sort of forming out of that. And so these ideas of organizing principles, patterns, inside and outside, center and periphery, these are all concepts. And yet there is behind that this ordering principle that is beyond concept. So ultimately, mandalas communicate this idea of unification. It's the great unification, the great oneness. All these separate things are being unified by some sense of oneness. They're interdependent. They co-emerge and co-arise, independence on each other. The deity arises independence with their palace, with their retinue. So it's a oneness, ultimately. Its ultimate communication is this principle of non-duality and oneness. So there's a lot of dimensions being communicated, very particular things. Each part of the mandala has specific meanings, and it actually gets very complex. And yet it's communicating wholeness and oneness. There is this principle behind all of phenomena that is connecting it. And then on a personal level, it's communicating this sort of my own self in the center of my experience, because on a personal level, we are also we're in the mandala of our own world, so the mandala as a kind of sphere that we create, or the sphere of influence, we all have this. And that word is often used in that way. They'll use that word mandala, talking about sort of a lama and the mandala of students like this. That word is used to sort of describe a sphere of influence. So we all have this, we're in the center of this mandala world that I'm creating with my senses and my cognition. So it's communicating how our mind works, right? So it's sort of a map of the mind, both on a conceptual level and also on an absolute level. So that's the purpose of the mandala principle. And then the mandala structures, as they're either painted, or the sand mandalas, or in our case, this three-dimensional mandala, there's very specific aspects to those shapes and forms and the various things that are in the mandala that communicate itself a lot of symbolic meanings. So I think that's sort of the big picture.
You spoke about the mandala as a support for practice as well. You mentioned that.
The mandala as a support for practice has to do with these Vajrayana sadhanas that are centered around a deity, right? So in all of the tantric texts in the different lineages, they're based around some specific deity, and that will be particular to the lineage, whether it's a Dakini, a feminine principle, whether it's a Yidam, whether it's a guru, there'll be some kind of deity representation in the very center. Sometimes they're single, sometimes they're in union with a consort. So then they manifest this field of their influence. And so then the shapes of the mandalas, whether the inside is going to be a circle, a square, a triangle, has to do with what kind of deity it is. And then all the other aspects of the mandala. And so that has to do with our sadhana practices. And when we're involved in the more elaborate forms of generating the deity, they will have very elaborate descriptions of their mandala. So oftentimes we have to visualize this first. We have to, and it's very, from a seed syllable, this arises, and we construct the environment. And then finally, the deity is arising in the center of it. These are the elaborate forms of sadhana practice. And, a lot of times what we are exposed to in the West are the very short forms of sadhana practice that's only focused on the deity. So there'll just be the deity visualization, but not all this other elaboration. So, but if you're participating in drupshans, for example, the full retreat sadhana, you're going to encounter these elaborate descriptions of the mandala. And that's when they will construct these mandalas, when they're doing these types of great accomplishment rituals, that it'll either be a sand mandala or they'll have an already constructed mandala that is the center of the practice. And then, that's used as the support for the visualization. So they are ultimately, when you become more deeply immersed in the traditions of whatever lineage you're doing and whatever deity you're practicing, you're going to encounter the long form of that particular sadhana cycle. And there will be the description of their palace and the mandala that you are then to visualize. And so at that time, you learn about all the different the components of the mandala and what they mean. And then you're meditating on that. You're meditating on these meanings as you're generating it in your mind, and then the deity in the very center of this. And so it's kind of like a journey. The mandala, we begin at the periphery, the outermost, which is this ring of fire, right? That's the wisdom that's going to burn all the ignorance. And then we enter in and we go in these concentric levels. The ring of fire, once we pass the ring of fire, then there's the ring of the Vajras that represents the indestructible mind. And then if it's a wrathful deity, then we encounter this ring of charnel grounds. This is a very interesting aspect of wrathful mandalas, these 8 charnel grounds that represent the 8 aspects of consciousness, the 5 senses and the 3 levels of conceptual mind. And they represent the boneyard of our existence, of our current samsaric existence, and all the ignorance and all the poisons that cause us to be in samsara. So that's on the very outer ring, is our sort of the remains of our existence and our many lives. And each of these charnel grounds, they have different figures in them. They have stupas and sadhus meditating, and they also have lots of skeletons and body parts and wild animals and trees and nagas. They have like this whole world, like a diorama. Each one of these has all these figures in them, and they represent each of the 8 consciousnesses, right? So then that's the world we're in. And then we pass through the ring of the lotuses, which is sort of like our rebirth and renewal. And from there, we enter into the sacred ground of the deity. There we start entering into the palace, beginning with the 4 gates that are in these 4 directions that represent the elements, their different colors, and we have to enter into one of the gates. right? And there'll be the protectors. All the protectors will be there. And then the gate guardians, we have to pass through the gate guardians. So it's like this kind of purification by fire until we can enter into the inner sanctum of the deity, whatever deity that is. And in the case of the mandala we're building this Vajrakilaya mandala. So that's very particular to this a yidam that's in our tradition, the Dujum lineage. Main yidam is Vajrakilaya, very wrathful deity. And Vajrakilaya has their retinue. So a Vajrakilaya mandala has all these, the central deity are in these phurba shapes, dagger shapes with the heads and the wings. In the center, Vajrakilaya with his two consorts. And then it sort of refracts the five Buddha families. From there, there's another level. The top level is the main deity. Then there's another level where you have the five Buddha families. And then there's another level where you have the 10 Harukas and their consorts, and each have two progeny. And then another level is the 21 sons. And then another level, you get these levels of manifestation that grow out of this central point. And they all have a function and they all serve a purpose. So you have to learn about these as you're learning about this particular sadhana of Vajrakilaya. What's the purpose? What do each of these deities look like? What is their function? What is their enlightened quality? They're all aspects of enlightened quality. So the Vajrakilaya mandala inside the palace are going to be this sort of array of these different phurbas that have different heads, animal heads, and they're all carved out of wood in this and that's inside the palace. So other other mandalas will have other deities inside, and how they will be arrayed will be particular to that sadhana cycle. So that's going to be different for the different deities. Otherwise, they all have this sort of concentric ring of the fire and the Vajras and the lotus and the palace with the four doors. They all sort of share that type of structure. But then, then whether they have charnel grounds or not, whether they're wrathful or not, and inside the inner sanctum, what specifically is there. So as we're doing these practices, it's like a journey from the outer rim into the center, where then ultimately we become this. This is, we become the deity, and this becomes our manifestation. That's the skillful means, right? These are all skillful means of working with our own mind to show us our own true Buddha nature by using this methodology. So it's like a journey, as we use the mandala. So the mandala becomes a support, a visual support for this journey, this meditative journey that we're going into the innermost aspect of our own Buddha nature ultimately. So that's how it's used as far as, practice. But these mandalas also serve another purpose as a kind of field of blessing. So, and this is where we get into sort of the project that we're doing, that Lama Dawa, conceived of many years ago, because they're considered a powerful source of blessings in the same way that stupas are. Right, so stupas are much more common now, and in the West we see many, many stupas being constructed. They have a geometric form, very specific sacred geometry. They're filled with many amazing things, and they themselves become this field of blessing that profoundly influence the surrounding areas in a beneficial way, that profoundly influence the essences of the elements. And so constructing a three-dimensional mandala has a very similar benefit. So wherever these mandalas are constructed, their benefits extend out into all directions of space, all dimensions of time, and bless the fundamental elements. And so then you have, well, what kind of mandala is it? What is the deity? What is the deity's quality, right? So the deities have different qualities. Some are peaceful, some are enriching, some are empowering, and some are wrathful, according to the four activities. And in this case, this is Vajrakilaya, a very wrathful deity. And, Lama Dawa had many visions or inspired downloads, you could say, from his protectors and from his gurus that we need to construct Vajrakilaya mandalas in very particular places, three particular places. Why Vajrakilaya? Because Vajrakilaya is the most powerful way to undercut negativity, conflict, and warfare. Right, so this goes into many of the prophetic things that Lama Dawa saw in the future, more and more conflict, more and more global warfare, as of course, this is exactly what we're seeing. But it's also in accordance with the prophecies of Guru Rinpoche. And in particular, there's a text by Dujam Lingpa that he wrote called the Kilaya Kajang, which is the prophetic guide to the 17 activities of Vajrakilaya, where it's a Dharma revelation. And in this Dharma revelation, Guru Rinpoche and Yeshe Tsogyal are having this conversation. And this is after he has given Vajrakilaya teachings. And now he's instructing Yeshe Tsogyal that these teachings need to be hidden as dharmas. And then she's asking him a series of questions of, when these are revealed in the future, what will the world be like? What will the signs be for when these teachings need to be manifest in the future? And so he then gives this long list of, future predictions of all the calamities that we're going to be facing and all the background causes of them, and then the different reincarnations of territons that are going to manifest at different times. And the most effective practice will be Vajrakilaya. So it speaks of the importance of Vajrakilaya at this time. And he goes on to say that it's, there's no other method other than Vajrakilaya to avert this kind of negativity and danger. So based on the prophecies and based on the prophecies of Guru Rinpoche, and then in particular in the Dujam lineage of Dujam Lingpa, Lama Dawa felt through his own inspired vision that this would be very, very beneficial to build these mandalas. Of course, we do Vajrakilaya practice, doing the practice is part of it. But the other part of these spiritual traditions are these kinds of monumental structures that serve to benefit in particular ways. So therefore, stupas are well known. But mandalas also have this same kind of benefit, that to construct a mandala in particular places that can optimize the blessings will have profound energetic benefits that can help to mitigate and undercut the levels of anger and violence and stuff that's on the rise. So this is part of his aspiration he had for many years. And of course, because Lama Dawa does mirror divinations, he got many guidance from mirror divinations about location, etc. And finally, it was settled on this location that I'm involved in Iowa, northeast Iowa, on the banks of the Mississippi River. That was seen as a very, very auspicious place because it's on this central channel of North America. The Mississippi River is the central channel. 3/4 of North America drains into the Mississippi River, which goes into the Gulf of Mexico. But not only that, when we went up to that area to see the area, Lama Dawa had many, many visitations by the local spirits and the Nagini of the river, because it was very alive there. And come to find out, there was all these Native American effigies that were there, created 2,000 years ago, that still existed on the bluffs of the Mississippi River Valley. That area of the Mississippi River is very beautiful. It's actually now a federal fish and wildlife refuge, 260-mile stretch. And there's 1,000-foot high bluffs on either side of the river valley, which is 3 miles wide, with rivers and islands and lakes. It's incredible. Are these Native American mounds that are in the shape of animals, that are in the shape of snakes and birds, that are 2,000 years old. And some of them have been preserved. There's a federal park in Iowa called the Effigy Mounds National Monument that has preserved them. Most of them were destroyed by the European farmers that came in and turned the prairie and the area into farmland. So they didn't know what these structures were. So, but some of them have been preserved. And so lo and behold, the Native Americans also recognized this area as a powerful place. They built these effigies were, they think they were used for ceremonial purposes. There are some that have human remains in them. So some of them were burial mounds, but many of them were not. And they think they were, the Native Americans went up to these bluffs to do ceremony like this. So Lama Dawa had many visitations when we went to that area, and we realized, oh my gosh, if we could find property here on the bluffs overlooking the Mississippi River, and particularly on the Iowa side, because then it's facing east, right? So this eastward facing was very important for Vajrakilaya, which is Vajra family from the eastern direction. That was a very important geocentric aspect that needed to be there. And the other thing that needed to be on a major body of water so that the water carries the blessings down, and in this case, down to the Gulf of Mexico, and then can spread out throughout the whole world. So what's the vehicle of transfer of these blessings? And in this case, the water element, again, the Vajra family, water element, some are fire element, some are air element like this. In this case, it had to do with the water element. So all these factors come into play. And so we found this beautiful property that was just put on the market right on a bluff. It's very difficult to find these kind of properties there. And yeah, so there's the Iowa property, and then at the same time in Mexico, he had similar experience in central Mexico near this volcanic mountain, Popocatépetl, very sacred mountain, active volcano, one of the most dangerous volcanoes in the world. It's the caldera underneath it, and there's Mexico City, 20 million people nearby. And he had many visions of the god of the mountain, the Hla of the mountain, just like the Hla of the Mississippi River, the Nagini came to him. In this case, the spirit of the mountain came to him. And so he saw that there needs to be also a mandala constructed and installed near the base of this volcanic mountain. And that would have to do with the fire element, right? So the Mississippi is working with a water element. This is working with a fire element. And then the third mandala was to be in Parping in Nepal, in Yanglesho, where Guru Rinpoche first practiced Vajrakilaya and started to disseminate this cycle. And so that will be according to the earth element. So we've been working on this project for many years, and now the mandala for Iowa was finished in 2020. We managed to ship it back as the world was shutting down with this pandemic. That was pretty wild. And earlier this year, the Mexico mandala was finished and is now in storage in Mexico City. And the Nepal mandala is currently being worked on, and that's going to be installed at the Dujum Yangzi's monastery in Parping. So we already have prearranged that they are going to build the building for it and install this in Yanglesho. So that was his vision, and it had to do with the prophecies of Guru Rinpoche, of Dujum Lingpa, the importance of Vajrakilaya, and what we can do to, as practitioners, of course, we have our practices, but this is also an aspect of the practices, is to create these kind of structures that are there long after we're gone, that have their own beneficial effects to pacify, to enrich, to empower, and to subjugate. In this case, to subjugate.
I'm curious how the mandala allows the elements to be pacified, the mandala itself and those four directions? Like, what is that relationship?
Well, the structure of these sacred structures, they themselves have the power to bless because of their design, because of the materials they're made out of, and because they become consecrated. Like when you consecrate a stupa or you consecrate a mandala, the deity becomes installed in there. Like there's a special ritual that you install. Even statues, like all the statues that you see, they're filled with things, mantras, and then there's a consecration where this energy is installed. So they themselves, they work without doing anything, right? Their presence, because of the form, they have a special form according to the rules of how they're made, the dimensions, the sacred geometry, the materials that are used are very special materials. They're done according to the text exactly, and then they're consecrated. And so they give off a field of blessings that's going to permeate all of the elements. And then if they're placed in a particular spot where there's an element that's very powerful, like in this case, the Mississippi River, that'll sort of be the dominant vehicle, or next to the Popocatépetl, which is a volcano. And those are sort of the exterior forms of elements, but elements also have a subtle level, right? So the four directions also communicate these elements, right? So the five elements in this system is space, and space is usually in the center, right? And from the space radiates the other four elements: air, water, fire, and earth, right? So, and they have to do with the different directions, right? East is water, west is fire, north is air, and south is earth, like this. And, so you have this idea of from the void or from the absolute nature of space, then the first manifestation forms. Form comes from this emptiness, right? And it starts in this very subtle level of the subtle elements. And they have different colors that signify these subtle aspects. And that coalesces, solidifies to form the physical elements that make up the world that we know, that we can touch and feel and smell and see and hear. And our bodies also have these five elements. The solidity of our bones is the earth element. The blood and lymph is the water element. The heat of our body is the fire element. The breath and movement is the air element. And our thinking consciousness is the space element, right? So everything is made of the elements. And they'll talk about the mother element and the child elements, right? So from the mother elements, we are the child elements, right? So there's this process of generation, right? This creation process that begins from this absolute void. And so the mandala represents this unfolding of this creation process. It's a representation of the symbolic representation of it. And so therefore it has an impact on the subtle moving into the physical world, right? So on the physical world, then the water elements, so there's the river, but there's a subtle element to that river too. It's not just the water that we can feel and see. There's subtle behind that appearance. There's a subtle realm of that water element, but it's very dominant there, right? Water element, Naga, it's a place where there's a lot of Naga energy, right? So a volcanic mountain, this fire elements, it's sort of dominant. And so the types of spirits, for example, are going to be the Tsen, these kind of spirits that live in the world of fire. And this has to do with the non-physical beings that are recognized in the Tibetan Buddhist world. And many of them are protectors. Many of them are the different kinds of Dharma protectors. And their abode are these elements in their subtle form. And so these structures have the effect, you could say, of balancing the elements or strengthening the elements, purifying the elements. They help to repair the damage that we humans have made on the elements because we're destroying the elements. And as we destroy the physical nature of water or the physical nature of earth, the subtle realms are disrupted and it becomes very disruptive to the spirits. And as the spirits become agitated and disruptive, then the blowback is on us humans, right? So the ancient texts talk about, like when Guru Rinpoche talks about these prophecies, and he talks about how in the future there's going to be more and more wars. What's behind that? What's the cause of that? Well, the cause of it is the constant non-virtue that humans are doing, the constant destruction that we're doing. And as we destroy the environment, the spirits are disturbed, and then people's minds are disturbed, and people want to fight all the time. There is this symbiotic relationship that mostly in the West we are clueless about. And but our actions and the things that we are doing on the planet, mostly for our own personal gain, right? We're not taking into consideration that the things that we do, the earth that we dig and mine, and the garbage that we produce, and the fires that we make, and the smoke that we produce are having effects on these subtle realms that are also sentient, that also are becoming sick, and that's affecting us because we have this codependent arising, right? We had this law of interdependence, which is a law that the mandala communicates. It communicates this co-emergent arising. And so therefore, the prophecies say we will have more diseases. Every time we have war, a new disease pops up. And lo and behold, we have these really strange, like pandemics that pop up seemingly out of nowhere. But there are backgrounds to this, right? So the human beings suffer more. We have more diseases. We have more calamities. We have more misfortune. Our economy goes down. Our yang energy and prosperity energy gets destroyed more and more. And so there's this cycle that we're on, this very negative, destructive cycle, and that we are playing a big role in it. And so these structures help to pacify, to bring some realignment on these subtle realms, to pacify the spirits. When the spirits are pacified, then we can feel more peace as well. When the spirits are happy, we experience more prosperity, right? So these kind of structures and the rituals that are done around them, because there's also now the practices that are done in accordance with these mandalas, have profound effects on all of these subtle realms, which has profound effects on all the beings living on those subtle realms, and that will bleed over into the human realm. For example, just as a personal example of my own observation, in the little teeny town that we live in Lansing, Iowa, there's 1,000 people that live there. It's a little small river town that we moved in 2007, right? So we've been there for quite some time. And this little town, always, I notice the businesses are always struggling. Like every year, somebody goes out of business and some new business starts there, you know. And what I've noticed since we have built our stupa and since we installed a Buddha is that the prosperity of the town is increasing. It's becoming a kind of vibrant little town. Of course, there's a lot of people in the town who are also trying to make this happen. But behind that, there has to be an energetic quality to draw these people, to inspire these people. There's more and more interesting people moving into our area and bringing all kinds of arts and all kinds of events that enrich the area. This is what I've noticed since we Buddhists have been up on the bluffs quietly doing our things. I like to think that we've played a part in bringing enrichment and prosperity to our little our little neck of the woods. Although, I wouldn't go bragging this to the local people, but I believe that to be true because I've seen, similar things like why do some towns prosper and some towns don't? Why do some businesses you just see one after another, they just can't make it work? Why? That has to do with the energy of the spot. That has to do with sort of invisible dynamics that are there that generally in the West we're not cognizant of. So we work on that level. All these activities that we do, the structures of the mandala, the stupas, the practices are working on this level, and that's where the beneficial effects come in. They're not necessarily overtly physical effects, although you can feel the effects and you can sometimes feel them very quickly. But it's something that sort of over time pervades and grows, and you start to see these different changes and these different positive qualities. Right? So that's how it's understood. It's understood to work that way. And it works on these subtle elemental realms, which then kind of show up if eventually in the physical elemental realms or that we can observe with our five senses like this.
I so value your ability to articulate the interplay of all of these levels. So the mandala, everything arises from the center, is what you shared. And there's this exchange between the center and the periphery. As long as we nurture the center, the periphery is supported. How does it look like to nurture the essence on both an everyday practical level and then in our own path as practitioners?
That is what we are practicing. Whatever our practice is, and of course I'm speaking from the context of a Vajrayana Buddhist path where it's a path, right, that begins with some kind of preliminary practice, and then we receive empowerment to start engaging in a sadhana practice according to the lineage. And so that becomes our method to introduce our own Buddha nature, to experience that. And once we start having the taste of that and we get confidence in that, that's the point. The point of the practices and the blessings that we receive from the lineages. So they have to have this lineage base. We have a teacher guiding us. We're employing these spiritual technologies and hopefully going into retreats because it really does require that you have made time in your life. You've kind of, prioritized your time that you're dedicating to these methods. And the blessings of the lineage and the teacher commingle with your own innate Buddha awareness, and that starts to arise. And it comes in glimpses, and then you become more and more familiar with it and more confident, so that then you go out into the world and you can stay in this sense without being distracted, right? That becomes the practice. How to maintain this is your practice. And that has to do with your vows, right? There's always vows and samayas that become essential. Actually, that's the main practice becomes, practicing your vows to keep coming back to this, right? Because we don't want to go back to the boneyard of our charnel grounds, right? But it's going to be in and out and in and out and in and out and in and out. So how do we come back to the center? We come back to the center by re-engaging with the practices we were given and by the vows that we've taken. So we have to constantly strengthen those vows. We have to constantly find ways to inspire ourselves, whether it's reading, study, sitting at the feet of the masters, going on pilgrimage like I'm about to do to go to the actual places where Buddha was. That brings these stories to life. It's a very important part. There's all these ways to keep us in the path so that we can continue to develop this and ultimately have confidence in it, that it becomes stabilized in the face of all the stuff in the world. We become more and more able to maintain that center, right?
Mhm.
So all the methods that we're given are the ways that we do this. And, so we have to, it has to be important enough for us to want to do this and to sort of create a lifestyle that allows us to do that.
Mm. And so, in terms of this Vajrakilaya mandala, what's the method then for these particular mandalas for empowering the mandalas? Will the community then be doing regular practice daily or annual?
All of that. I mean, next year we're building the temple, right? So we're right now talking to architects. And by the way, we've hired a Vastu architect who does Vastu design from the Maharishi community in Iowa because they build all their buildings. And that's itself a mandala from the Vedic idea. They build their buildings according to the mandala principles. So we thought, well, we're going to do this. So we're right now working with a Vastu architect and coming up with the final design ideas, and we'll start build. We have a sponsor. For many years we've been on this fundraising journey. Now we have a grant and a sponsor, and we'll start building. So after the construction, then the mandala has to be installed, and that is done in the ritual. So we have to invite Lama, and I've already been speaking with Gewar Rinpoche. I met with him in Germany in September. He's the one I have in mind that I would really like for him to come with some of his lamas to to then they like a sand mandala is a ritual way of constructing it. These three-dimensional mandalas also have to be put in according to the sadhana. So they'll be engaged in the sadhana practice as they place each of the purbas and as they construct the mandala. So it's built and created in the context of sadhana practice. And that's probably at least a week of ongoing rituals with lamas that we will invite, and then that gets installed and stabilized. So that's the consecration. They has to be consecrated according to this, in our case, this Namchak Putri Vajrakilaya cycle of Dujum Lingpa. After that, then yes, it becomes, one of our main practices is Vajrakilaya. It's one of my main practices. So yes, it will be a place where then people can come and engage in Vajrakilaya practice, and that we will be doing drupshans, periodic drupshans or drupchos, as intensive practices as a sangha. Absolutely. I mean, it helps us to develop this practice, and we can reconsecrate. It keeps bringing the energy in to this sacred space with this mandala, and just continues to empower it. So it's becomes this, again, this symbiotic. We are benefiting from it. It's benefiting our practice, and at the same time, we're infusing this with this blessing energy of the lineage.
And why this particular Rinpoche from Germany do you feel would be perfect for this?
He has a very good connection with Lama Dawa. He actually presided over Lama Dawa's cremation, and he's the holder of the Namkha Kyunzum School of Dujum Lingpa, and their specialty is actually trauma, the Toluk School of Trauma. But Vajrakilaya, Dujum Lingpa, the first Dujum Rinpoche cycle, they are really experts in Dujum Lingpa's works, and so because he has such a good connection with Lama Dawa. And I invited him to come out in 2020 when I was in Nepal, and I participated in their drupshan, their trauma drupshan in his monastery, and at that time made it and invited him to come to our center, which he agreed to do. He was going to come in September of 2020, but of course it was all canceled because of COVID. Right. So I had already made this connection. He and his brothers, who are all lineage holders of this Namkha Kyungsum school, have a very good connection with Lama Dawa. Right. So it's somebody that Lama Dawa would have trusted. This is my decisions are based on things like this.
Mm.
That's going to be dependent on being able to get them all visas.
Maybe if to up the Vajrakilaya practice.
Yes, yes, we will be doing lots of protector practices to pave the way for this. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm actually curious because so you've done a Vajrakilaya Salung And
Mhm.
you said that one of your main practices is Vajrakilaya. So for you personally, when you think of prior to being such a devoted Vajrakilaya practitioner to after, what have you noticed for yourself, the impacts of making this connection?
Of that practice?
Yeah, just like the
Well,
relationship even with Vajrakilaya.
yeah, I mean, it was a practice I had to work up to. First I did Dakini practice, peaceful Yeshe Tsogyal practice. Then after that, I did the guru practice of Yabyum. And then I did this wrathful practice. That was my guru's instruction to me. Like, nope, you've got a lot of purifying to do before you can handle this kind of energy because it is very intense. Wrathful deities are basically it's an intensification. That's what we mean by wrathful. Vajrakilaya is actually wrathful Vajrasattva.
Mhm.
Vajrasattva is the essence of Vajrasattva, this beautiful, peaceful deity, but in their, take action right now mode. So then they're wrathful. So there's swift results. There can be lots of upheavals and disruptions. Like for example, when we were building this Vajrakilaya mandala in Nepal, and on that in 2020, when it was the final stages of being constructed, and they put it together for us so I could take pictures, this wild storm came out of nowhere, just this wicked wind, just it was like amazing. And then again, when it was shipped to the US in boxes, and we had it in storage through the COVID years. And then last year, or 2023, we decided let's take it out of storage and open it in our yurt, our teaching space. So we unpacked it and we shipped it there. And this wild storm, lightning, it was wild, just like out of nowhere as we're unpacking this. So very strong effects. So, I had to work my way up to being able to work with those energies because, wrathful practices are not beginner practices, actually.
Mhm.
Wrathful deities, which is why a lot of times they're kind of kept, you could say secret. It's not really secret, but it's just it can really be a strong, swift cutting through, because that's what it is. The imagery of the phurba, the ritual daggers, is to cut through. It's sort of the last resort. We're just going to cut this. And that can be hard to handle, as we all know. If we have a sudden tearing away of something in our lives, that can be a hard thing to handle, right? So yeah, I had to work up to it. But then you come to understand what is the meaning of wrathfulness? What does that mean? It's really compassion. It's compassion in action. It's the kind of compassion that, a mother sees their toddler running into the traffic and they're, just instant, fast, ferocious, right? It's not angry, right? It's something fast cutting through as a last resort, right? So people have to be mature to handle this. So of course that means people have done Nundro and in my case, and then Lama Dawa also had his students first start with Yeshe Tsogyal, right? So the Yeshe Tsogyal practice to develop wisdom awareness, and then the guru practice to receive the blessings of the lineage, and finally is Vajrakilaya is the practice we did last. But that's not the case of all teachers. Some teachers will start people with Vajrakilaya practice.
Mm.
So, it can be different according to the teacher and how they're guiding their students. But my experience was that, I needed to kind of prepare to be able to handle that. And now it brings swift results, um, swift clarity of mind, for the kind of clarity that it brings, this kind of pointed quality of the mind to penetrate through stuff, right? That's the phurba quality. That's one of the four. The purbas have these four qualities. One is the wisdom, awareness, the penetrative quality of cutting through the BS. Like this ability to do this, to be able to, quickly discern, what is what, that discernment process. What is what?
And what are the
Yeah.
other qualities of the phurba?
They're ultimate compassion, right? Ultimately, they're symbols of compassion, right? Because it's what's underneath all that anger. What's underneath all of it is really compassion, but it's being veiled, right? So it's a swift method for removing the veils to reveal one's ultimate compassion, right? So there's the phurba of bodhicitta, right? So that you develop the ability that through your great bodhicitta itself can cut through. This is the ability to use compassion as a way of undercutting, right? So that's kind of the ultimate level, right? And then there's the material phurba, the actual thing, the ritual dagger that's used in a ritual way. That's sort of the relative truth way of working with a phurba to conduct these rituals, right? So there's the material physical going into more and more subtle and more enlightened aspects that are, of course, non-material. So a phurba practitioner, a Vajrakilaya practitioner has to understand these things, and that's why it's really an advanced practice. I mean, I see people really fascinated with Vajrakilaya and they want to get their purbas and they want to play with their daggers and that's really, it's not the right idea. It's really not. And so you have to have already had some experience of, let's say, emptiness of self to understand the true nature of these wrathful practices and not get caught up in what can seem like kind of occult aspects, because it can look like a really occult practice. These rituals, these wrathful rites that we do to, these little effigies we make and put in triangles and beat them and cut their heads off. It can look like an exorcism from a shamanic thing, but if you don't already have these experience of your wisdom awareness as yourself as the deity, you're going to misuse those practices. You're apt to misuse those practices, or you don't have the maturity. And if you do use those practices, this is one of the things Lama Dawa used to say, if you try to do these wrathful practices, because people would want to learn how to do all the wrathful things. And I sometimes get requests from people, will you teach these medley, the wrathful rites, and these are people who haven't done Nundro, they haven't done the generation of the deity, and they just want to do this magical stuff. And Lama Dao used to say, if you do that, you don't have the pride of the deity. You have to have the pride of I'm Vajrakilaya. You have to understand what that means, which is the emptiness of self. Then you try to do this stuff, and it's going to come back on you. That effect will come back on you in a very negative way. So it's dangerous. Therefore, they consider it dangerous if you don't have the wisdom, awareness, understanding. So that you're in that meditative state while you're engaging in these rituals, right? You have to be in this state. That takes practice. It takes having done the generation stage retreats sufficiently, and then you can start engaging with these activities. I would say it's an advanced practice, right? But for those who have the prerequisites, for those who are moving on the path, according to the prophecies of Guru Rinpoche, this is going to be the supreme method to undercut this. I heard a story once about during the 90s, when we were sort of at this Cold War with Russia, and it was before the fall of the Russian Empire during the 80s and 90s that Dudjom Rinpoche had certain practitioners, yogis, do Vajrakilaya retreat for 10 years. And when they came out of retreat is when the Russian Empire kind of collapsed. That was like 1989. The Berlin Wall fell. Like, it was interesting. Like, they came out of retreat and then all this kind of stuff happened in the world, and I think, oh, that's really interesting, you know, which is how these things would work, right? How this wrathful energy would show up it would just like suck the energy out of some negative manifestation and it would just implode on itself. Like, that's really how it works. It's not that we come in with a bigger bomb and, like, it's not like this. It just literally sucks the negativity or undercuts it and it just collapses on itself, right? So that's how we understand these wrathful practices
Mm.
to work.
And for you with these building these mandalas, I mean, this is a really monumental time. I mean, literally monumental, but also just the fact that it's a long time coming. It's been,
Yeah,
decades in the making. When you're thinking of just like your path as a teacher and the spaces you hold for retreat, even just what you shared about the Cold War, do you have any aspirations or ideas that come to mind of like ways you might want to hold Vajrakilaya retreats or do things, to continue to support these
sure.
difficult times?
Yeah, sure. I can see that going forward. How it will show up, I don't know. I don't make a plan about it. It has to kind of arise, right? There has to be the interest I have to see that there's this interest in it. I probably will start teaching more about Vajrakilayas. So as we manifest this physical structure, there's the opportunity for me to educate people about the importance of it, of the importance of the structure, but also to talk about Vajrakilaya itself, right? So I will be taking more opportunities to start communicating this in a general way. Like, for example, the prophecies that I mentioned, Dujum Lingpa's Prophecies Kalaya Kajang, I'm finishing a translation of that, and I will be putting that out on Saraswati Publications site. That is all about the prophetic visions of this Vajrakilaya cycle and why it's important and the kinds of calamities that Guru Rinpoche. So we can see, oh my gosh, we are in this time. Look at how they're describing the times that we live in. To inspire, to wake up maybe people's own whatever karmic, people have to have the karmic predisposition for this, right? And so however that can be woken up and certainly I will be doing that. And, ultimately my aspiration is to teach other lamas to come, like Gewa Rinpoche, these masters to come and and then I'm there as a support. I'm more comfortable being the support person. I really am.
Why is that, do you think?
Yeah, it's just I feel the weight of the responsibility when you are like a lama, a lineage holding lama, and you're giving empowerments. It's a huge responsibility. And so, yeah, I feel very cautious about it because I just see all the problems that can come up with it. So,
Mm.
I'm sort of tiptoeing my way, letting the causes, letting to see what shows up. It's not something you can, it's not like a business plan that I'm gonna do this and then I'm gonna do this and this is gonna happen. I can't think that way. My teachers didn't think that way. That is
Mhm.
not the right way. As a teacher, there has to be people making these requests of you. That's how this tradition works. That's how we have to understand it. We go to the teachers, we make a request, and based on the requests, they manifest. Like all of these things, all of the texts I just mentioned, came because a student requested this of Dujun Lingpa, and so therefore this comes out, right? And then we all benefit from this. Yeshe Tsogyal requests Guru Rinpoche to give ideas about the future. And so then he speaks this and she writes it down and hides it out of Dharma. There has to be the request. It can't be, I'm a teacher with my ambition and I'm going to create my Dharma center with, it can't be like this. It has to kind of have this organic growth of the right people coming because of karmic connections, and then you seeing the need for this or feeling prompted, okay, it feels like it's time for this. It has to be like this.
Feels very
So
mandala principle oriented.
this is very Mandala principle, yes. And if
Yeah.
it's meant to happen, it will happen, right? So I
Mm.
don't really, I don't make a plan about it. If it's meant to happen, it'll happen on its own like this. But there has to be the maturity of the students too. For something like this, I had to see the maturity of the students.
You mentioned the story with Guru Rinpoche and the original arising of Vajrakilaya teachings itself in Yanglesho. Do you want to share about that story?
Let's see what I can remember about it. Yeah, I mean, he was in Yanglesho practicing, and there was all kinds of disruptions. He saw that he needed to have a way to deal with obstacles, so he sent some of his attendants, one of them was a Nepali man, to Bodh Gaya to get this particular cycle, which they received from a Dakini. You know, so it's like there's this kind of mysterious Dakini involved in this story of Vajrakilaya that we don't know a lot about. But anyhow, he received these texts and then he did the Vajrakilaya practice and actualized the Vajrakilaya practice and subjugated many of the disturbing spirits that were arising in that area. And so, and then while he was engaged in that practice is when King Trison Detsen sent an emissary to him to say, please come to Tibet, because the king was trying to establish Buddhism as the national religion, and they were having so many problems. They were trying to build this monastery, and the spirits were disturbing. And of course, that was mostly a Bun shamanic culture. And there was a lot of resistance to bringing this Buddhism. So they, he was advised to invite this, this tantric master Padmasambhava. So, well, where was he? Well, he's in Nepal, in this cave. So he was doing Vajrakalaya practice and actualizing those activities as this request came. So yes, it sort of like marks the beginning of our story with Guru Rinpoche's connection with Tibet, right? Those were the interdependent connections that came together for him to go to Tibet and then help to establish the Vajrayana Buddhism in Tibet. And so the Vajrakilaya played a really important role in that. And then Yeshe Tsogyal, when she had to go, there's a story of when she had to go find her consort, right? She had to go find Tsarasali in Nepal, right? Nepal was just this little kingdom in Bhaktapur at that time, and she had to make this arduous trek across the mountains to go find this guy, right? Of course, there's no email or phone number or name. She just knows, he's got a red mole on his chest and, some kind of marks and signs on his body like this. And then she shows up at the market, the square, where, that's where you go when you go to these towns. You go to the market square and then you're noticed. And he walks right up to her and says, "Hey, you're looking for me?" But he was an indentured servant. He was an Indian foreigner in Nepal as a servant, and she had to buy him, from the woman who owned him. And she needed a lot of money to do that, which she didn't have. She had used up all her gold that she brought on this journey. And then this opportunity arose where some noble person's son had suddenly died, and she resurrected him using Vajrakalaya practice. She used the Vajrakalaya practice to sort of resurrect him from the dead. And so, as gratitude, the parents of this boy, you know, what do you want? And she's like, well, I need this much gold, So that's how she got the gold to buy at Sarasale to bring him back to Tibet. That was through Vajrakalaya activity practice, right? And then this, as the story goes, when Guru Rinpoche is teaching Yeshe Tsogyal, and she's specifically requesting Vajrakalaya practice. Why is she requesting this? Because of all the problems she has as a woman practicing. And she has this long lament of all the difficulties she's had to endure being a woman trying to do this practice, how she's been maligned, all the gossip that follows her, all the obstacles. So she felt, I need to I need to have a way to remove all these obstacles that I'm encountering trying to practice as a woman. And so for her, she makes this specific request of Guru Rinpoche to teach her Vajrakilaya. He was actually saying you should do Amitabha practice. That's the supreme practice. And she's like, no, no, I have so many obstacles. I want the Vajrakilaya practice. So that became the condition for her to receive this practice from him in the first place, which I think is interesting. You know, it started with a woman, and it became Yeshe Tsogyal's practice to deal with the obstacles she was having doing practice as a woman. You know, so it's kind of a woman's practice in a way, you
Yeah.
know. And so she then got accomplishment with Vajrakilaya. Then she needed a consort and brought Atsara Sale, like this kind of thing. You know, so it became central to her ability to be able to continue on her path with no obstacles, right? So as practitioners, we use this Vajrakalaya practice. It supports our practice by removing obstacles that can come our way to doing practice. So, you know, it became central. And of course, Guru Rinpoche taught this to the major disciples, and it's been hidden as termas, and it's become very pervasive through the Nyingma school and also in the Sakya school, you know, so Vajrakilaya is a major yidam. But it, you know, it was Guru Rinpoche's receiving this text while he's in Yanglesho and then actualizing the practice to deal with the kinds of obstacles that were arising in that area. Some of them had to do with a king. There was a king and Godavari, whose son had been turned into a frog by the local Nagini, and he had to go subjugate that Nagini. That's in Godavari. There's a place that commemorates that, where
Mm.
he subjugated the Nagini and got the prince back out from the Naga realm. And you know, there was all kinds of things he did. So he used Vajrakalaya to deal with these kinds of um, manifestations of problems that they saw were spirit related. And then as Guru Rinpoche is going to Tibet, he encounters many, many obstacles of different mountain spirits and lake spirits, you know, and uses Vajrakalaya to deal with that.
Mm. Well, is there anything else you want to share about the Vajrakilaya mandala, Vajrakilaya in general, like anything that makes the mandala unique in terms of its purpose, or just anything else you want to share? You've already been quite elaborate.
I think we've covered it. I mean, I don't know of any other three-dimensional Vajrakilaya mandala other than Bhutan. Bhutan, there is one. You know, so it certainly will be the first of its kind in North America, and you know, both in America and Mexico. So that makes it unique. There's a few places that have created smaller three-dimensional mandalas, but not, this is large, you know, this is 13 feet high and like this. So yeah, that makes it very unique.
Oh, it's so beautiful. I mean, thank you so much for staying with this vision. It's definitely important, and I hope that it leads to more activities in this way, more wrathfully beneficial activities.
So do I. I mean, I'm feeling, of course, with all the things going on in the world today, the timing of this, it couldn't be sooner. But it, you know, it's just, I trust the timing. I mean, I didn't know when are we going to do this because it's really hard to raise money. And then we, you know, this year, this wonderful sponsor showed up and we had this grant and they're 100% behind this project. You know, so it's timing. You know, it's the ripening of causes and conditions, and of course our practices that we're doing to generate to create auspicious circumstances. And I just trust the timing, you
Mm.
know. And then so our timeline is next year, 2025, the building's built, and then the interior, and we're planning the consecration. And that's when I've asked Gero Rinpoche to come in 2026. That's our timeline. I feel it's important to have deadlines because a deadline really, there's something energetic about a deadline. I found this with when we built the stupa. I had no idea how to build a stupa. We made a deadline. We said we're going to consecrate it at this time, and there's something about that that mobilizes energy when you have this deadline. So it's important to make a specific time. We're setting things in motion, and then the Mexico mandala, I'm very committed to helping them too. They still have to buy the property. They have to buy land. They have the mandala now. That's finished. Now they have to buy the property. Then the Nepal mandala is sort of taken care of itself, right? So I'm also committed to seeing these installed and consecrated as quickly as possible. Yeah, that's my main focus. I may not be teaching as much next year because I will be very involved in this. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Khandro Kunzang. Always a pleasure to be in your presence.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you very much. And I hope we meet soon.